So today I'm going to talk about the employment for all, making it happen. So I've also just been on a study tour to Europe and the United Kingdom, and I attended an international employment conference. I actually just got back last night. So I saw some amazing examples overseas of practices that are really shifting the dial, really making a big difference. So I'll talk about those today as well. My presentation will be a little bit drier, I think, than some of the ones we saw this morning, which were very, personal stories. So mine, as we said, as Nellie said, is a bit more at the systems level and what we can do to really make sure that everybody's got access to opportunities. I'll just acknowledge, so I work on Wurundjeri land down in Melbourne, so I'll acknowledge elders past and present, and remind me the language group? The Turrbal people here in Brisbane as well, acknowledge, and any Aboriginal people who are with us today. So I'm going to give a little overview about what's the current situation in Australia. We're in a big period of change at the moment. So we'll cover those. What works. So we do have some pretty strong evidence internationally about what works. The issue in Australia is not knowing what works, it's getting access to it on the ground. So we'll talk about that quickly. We'll highlight some Australian good practice examples, and then, as I said, I'll cover off some international good practice examples that I came across on my study tour. So I'm just going to make a note on language here. So internationally, the language that we call customised employment in Australia, internationally it's called supported employment. We're the only country in the world that uses the term supported employment to mean working in a sheltered workshop. At the conference I was just at in Vienna, they're called sheltered workshops. That is the language that people use. It's historic why that language was taken and used to mean sheltered workshops in Australia. And there was a lot of conversation at this conference about how in Australia we can reclaim this language of supported employment to mean what the evidence says, which is supports for people with significant support needs to be in mainstream jobs in the community, full award wage jobs. So when you hear me talking about supported employment today, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about sheltered workshops. It's often called customised employment in Australia, and I know Crew and the others use that language as well. It's also IPS. So overseas supported employment is also individualised placement and support, which is an evidence-based model for people with persistent and severe mental illness. So supported employment overseas means supports that are based on this sort of 5-step model, which we call customised employment, but also this IPS model for people with mental illness. Oh, just also, I was talking with Nellie before. I'm happy to have a conversation as we go today. So if you've got something that you want to ask or raise, just put your hand up. I think there's a mic somewhere, so we don't have to wait till the end for questions. Okay, here's the current situation in Australia. So the employment rates for people with disabilities have improved in Australia. I haven't got the graph here. I should have put the graph on here. We saw an uptick in employment for people with disability from the data in 2018 to the data in 2022. So we're not sure how that's explained, but we have a couple of theories, one being COVID and the workforce shortages that COVID produced. The second is around disclosure. So we have more people with autism and other disabilities who feel safe and confident now to disclose their disability and to ask for adjustments. So we think there's a bit of that. We're not quite sure what the others are. However, the low rates of employment for people with disabilities that are intellectual disability, autism and psychosocial disability haven't shifted. They've remained stubbornly low. So when you see that data saying we've had an uptick, we have, but not for everyone. This current government, for maybe 6-7 more weeks, has had an increased focus on employment for people with disability. So we had a bit of a drought in this country around employment for probably 10 or 12 years prior to this government being elected. We couldn't get them really to engage in conversations about people who who want to work for social inclusion reasons, who are not required to work, who are not compelled to work. We have seen a much bigger focus with this current government. The polished pathways, as Catherine from Inclusion Australia calls them, to disability services remain in this country. So if you go into your NDIS planner and say you want a day options program or a sheltered workshop, no worries, you'll get the funding and away you go. There are very few supported employment services available in Australia. So again, I'm drawing back to that language of supported employment that supports people to work in a mainstream job. There's some, they're patchy. We call it the postcode lottery. If you live in a particular area, you might have one. If you live in another area, you won't. And we saw that earlier with the South Australian example of the micro-enterprise business. We have fragmented and siloed systems, and we have a complex ecosystem. So what that means is that TAFEs don't talk to employment services, disability services don't talk to employment services, schools don't talk to really anyone. So everybody's in their own little silo doing what they think they should be doing, but they're not sharing, they're not talking to each other, they're not collaborating, they're not pooling their funding and resources. So, we end up with this need for system navigation. And, basically if we have a good system, you don't need to navigate it. It should be able to work. All right, so what's changing in Australia? So the new Commonwealth Disability Employment program, which is now going to be called Inclusive Employment Australia, so we're getting rid of DES. DES is gone, is supposed to commence on July the 1st, 2025. Now, the contracts haven't gone out. They're in a re-tendering process at the moment, and I was with a senior bureaucrat from the department last week. The contracts have not been sent out. So with an election looming, I think that date will probably be September. She didn't say that as directly as that, but she might have dropped a few hints about that. So DES is gone. To get out that language out of your head, and it's now called Inclusive Employment Australia. That's the new name of the program. We've got the NDIS review impacts. Actually, I'll just go back to that other point. One of the things that's happened with this new contract is that they have changed the rules. So previously, if you had a work capacity, whatever that means, of less than 8 hours, you were not eligible for the program. And some of you might have experienced going into a DES and being told, no, it's not for you. There was some very good advocacy undertaken, particularly by Inclusion Australia, and that has been dropped. So now everybody, regardless of work capacity, will be eligible. The second major change is that there are two types of services. There's going to be what they're calling specific cohort providers. So intellectual disability could be one, young people, people with autism. And then there are going to be what they're calling generalist providers. So they're the big ones you already know, the ones where they work with everyone. What we're unsure about is whether the specific cohort providers, and we supported 25 of them to go through the tender process, 20 decided not to tender. So that shows you the barriers to getting into being able to deliver. So we're very concerned about government's intentions to have a mix of services on the ground, including these specific cohort providers actually being realised in the tender process. So stay tuned for that one, but if they don't get what they thought they were going to get, there could be potentially an opportunity to advocate to government for a different way of purchasing those services. So this is our new Centre of Excellence. So the name is going to be the Centre for Inclusive Employment. That was developed by the department and the minister. We didn't make that name up. So it technically commenced on the 1st of March, but we didn't sign the contract till last Friday, so we're a little, it's not going to start on the 1st of March. It's a 3.5-year funded centre, and we've got $22 million from the government for this centre. So it's a significant amount of money. And when I was telling people in Europe and the UK about it, they were nearly falling over with mostly excitement that we had this much money to potentially do something in Australia. So as I said earlier, importantly, the family capacity building organisations are a consortium member. So they're right in the middle of what this is going to look like. So stay tuned for those of you that are crew members or other members of other organisations. there will be ongoing kind of communication with you about the work of that centre. The centre does have a focus on people with intellectual disability and autism. It also has a focus on reducing the number of people who are in sheltered workshops. So we have got some potential to do some really good things here with this little window of opportunity we've got. So there's quite a bit of excitement about the work that we can do. Also, there's an increased focus on kind of alternative programs that we haven't really had in the system. So work integrated social enterprises have been widely used internationally, particularly to support people with, they call them care leavers overseas, people who've been in out of home care, people coming out of prison, migrants and refugees. So people who've got, sometimes the language is they're furthest from the labour market, or they've got kind of needs before they get into the market. So what we're starting to see is an interest in how this WISE approach could be used to support people with intellectual disability. So it's getting a bit of interest in Australia. Like the speaker earlier, I think it's Helen, we've got a grant around this WISE model, and like Helen, ours was for 1 year, and we're now into our 5th year as well. We're far from having it sort of sorted in Australia, but there is increased interest in these WISEs as a potential pathway for people. The other thing that this current government are interested in is place-based service delivery. So what that means is a local area. I was talking to someone before from Coolum. You'd get the system operating better in Coolum, or probably the Sunshine Coast. So you have TAFE colleges, schools, providers, families, all working together around a particular place. And what that does is it means that you can design programs and services and interventions that actually meet the needs of that community. Because obviously the needs of people in Brisbane versus the people in Alice Springs or people in Kununurra are completely different. So it allows for, localised responses. So let's wait for the election, but the current government have flagged that if they get a second term in government, there will be an increased focus on place-based service delivery. And there's the last one, the federal election. So, we are in a bit of a golden period at the moment. We've got a government that's engaged with us and wants to work with us. So we'll see what happens with the election. But there has been a commitment that if the current government remains, we'll get another 3 years of good advocacy opportunity, let's put it that way. Has anyone got any comments or queries about any of that? Yep.
Just ask, do you feel like these things will come to fruition, whether we change those governments or not?
So I've been around long enough that I was around in the 90s when the government decided that employment services for people with disabilities was a good idea for social inclusion and human rights reasons. And we had 350 providers across Australia within 5 years. So things can change, but I think both governments are locked into this compliance-based employment services model, which is why this cohort's been shut out, because they don't have compliance obligations. So I think we can possibly try to shape that system a bit differently, but also we need to pop up some alternatives as well. We can't rely on that system. So, I think it's probably the best opportunity we've had for 25 years to make change. And I think the consortium we've built is really good because, we deliberately wanted to get everyone together at the table rather than having people outside the tent. We wanted everyone in the tent. So I think we've got the right people in the room. Yeah.
How do you think the new inclusive employment services will be different from the previous DES providers?
So if the government gets what they want, there'll be a mix in every... So they call them ESAs, Employment Service Areas. There's about 111, I think there is, across Australia. So Brisbane would be divided into about 4 ESAs. The government's intention is to have a mix of generalist and specific cohort providers in every region, small and large, for-profit and not-for-profit. So one thing that I'm hearing from quite a few people is that some of the big providers, the for-profit ones, will have their influence greatly reduced. So there's a perception in government that they've got too big. So that's one change. But I think the experience we had with that, that supporting 25 small organisations, they can't bid in. It's just the model doesn't work because it's outcomes based. So you've got to invest all this time in people and this resources and money, and then you don't get paid until they get a job. For our cohort, that doesn't work. So I saw some really lovely localised commissioning examples in England and ring fencing of money for particular cohorts. So I think there'll be some advocacy in the next couple of months around the way government buys its services. Yeah, this contracted model doesn't work for our group, and there's pretty good evidence to support that. But it's still going to be the same old compliance-driven, unfortunately. Yeah. The other thing is the 0 to 8 thing. That is quite a significant game changer. And you know, we can talk inside the Centre of Excellence around how we can drive change in the way service providers work, potentially, given that there'll be this kind of new cohort in the 0 to 8 cohort.
I think that's particularly important, isn't it? People on a disability pension can't afford their rent at the moment. So that's what people I've been working with, they're trying to find work through desk providers so they can pay their rent, but the desk providers aren't able to support the people with that 0 to 8 hours.
No, they're not. And also the model is designed, the way they get paid, the biggest payment they get is at the 26-week mark. So there's no incentive really to keep supporting people after 26 weeks. I don't have to tell you lot that people with intellectuals will need ongoing lifetime potentially support. So a model that cuts people off at 26 weeks, you know, that's never going to work for this cohort. So, all right. So now I'm just going to focus a little bit. I said before that we actually know what works. There's always more to learn, but the evidence from overseas, particularly the United States, is pretty solid about what works to improve employment opportunities for people. Getting it into the service system or onto the ground is where we run into problems. So these are the 6 things. So none of this will be new to you. Family involvement and high expectations is number 1. Number 2 is early transition planning and career support. The third one is skills development. So this is in school and post school. I'll go into each one in a bit more detail in a minute. Including vocational skill development. So having a specific focus on learning skills for work is one of the drivers. Work experience and particularly paid employment is the greatest predictor of later paid employment for young people while they're still at school. So people who have paid employment while at school, the chances of them having, we call it predictors, they're predictors of later work. So work experience, yes, and work experience doesn't mean the 2 weeks you get at school in year 10. Work experience means lots of opportunities to be in and out of workplaces, learning about work, learning what you're good at, all that sort of stuff. Paid employment as little as 3 hours a week. So 1 shift at Woolies, 1 shift at the bakery. It doesn't have to be 10 hours. Employment supports. So we know customised employment, for example, has a strong evidence base. We know IPS has a strong evidence base. So we need them on the ground. And then the last one is interagency collaboration. So I mentioned before the fragmented siloed system we have in Australia. Interagency collaboration, the reason I'll go into it in a minute, but it means services working together in a formalised way. So schools having formal relationships with providers, etc. Okay, so the first one, family involvement and high expectations. So I think we've got the NDIA engaged in this one now. 15 years is I mean, some people say 14 or even younger, but let's stick with 15 for now, which is 3 years earlier than what the NDIS have been doing, which used to be kind of you're leaving school at 18. So we need to be having conversations, there needs to be funding available, there needs to be services happening from 15. Overseas we've seen really good results for, and in Australia as well, for training and support for families to act as career allies. So there's a program in the United States called FEAT, which stands for Family Employment Advocacy Training. And so it's actually deliberately teaching people how to be career allies. And what we've seen in Australia is families know where the line is. So we've done some studies where families have been a significant support, employment support to people, but they don't want to be in workplaces, they don't want to be doing on-site support, they don't want to be negotiating wages, talking about insurance necessarily. They think that that's the job of a job coach or a job broker, but the significant in-kind support that they can provide is, makes or breaks many of the jobs. And then purposefully building family support into the employment arrangements. As I said, we evaluated the Down Syndrome Association's Employment Connections program, and they had a triangle model. So family member, the employer, and the Down Syndrome, the job provider, and the person in the middle. So the second one is early transition planning and career support. And again, we've already heard it this morning. It's not about disability, it's about if you don't get the same opportunities as other people, then now you're 7 steps behind. So we need to be really strongly focusing on making sure people get the same opportunities, scaffolded if necessary, to do that early career exploration. There's a lovely program in the United States called the Goal-Directed Career Development Model. It was designed for people with intellectual disability. We don't have it here. But it's about a goal and then actions to help achieve that goal, and then reviewing and reflecting on the goal, and then back to more goals. So it's just a continual process of goal setting, but the important thing is you're also setting the actions to help that goal. So there's some of the things we could bring into Australia. We need better supports in school. So school-based supports, have a strong evidence base. And this notion of scaffolding, it means the same opportunities but with a bit of extra support around people. And I think one of the things we're seeing at the moment is, and I won't say we're seeing it, we're hopeful that capacity building employment supports, which is replacing SLES, supposedly are going to be able to be used to scaffold some of these early opportunities. So that's something we can keep in touch with you guys about whether or not that's actually happening at the ground level. There's also been a program in Victoria to train careers practitioners in providing careers advice to students with disabilities. It's been done through the Career Educators Association. So again, we need to recognise that careers practitioners are not trained in this sort of stuff. So let's give them some training. Let's actually get them, engaged. And then the last one, I know someone used the language of discovery before. Overseas it's called vocational profiling as well. They're formal mechanisms to document people's strengths, preferences and conditions for success. And I do love this conditions for success language, which I actually got from Jan at Imagine More. So it's about what are we looking, how are we going to set this up? What's going to work for this person? So that's kind of the outcome of doing that profiling. Skills development in schools and post-schools. So there's a big focus overseas on vocational skill development. We don't really have this here in Australia at all, from what I can see. So what the literature tells us is that it's life skills. Life skills are work skills. They're the same thing. Being able to travel, being able to move around the community, being able to prepare your lunch or have a conversation in the workplace. These are work skills as well as life skills. So what we know is doing them all together, building them all together is the way to go. We don't want to separate them. But then we also need those vocational skills. So, being safe at work, soft skills, communication, those kinds of things are critical as well. And the way we learn those is by being in workplaces early and being trained, that kind of thing. But the paid employment one is really critical, as I said. So we do know it's the greatest predictor of later employment. So again, it's great that families are doing stuff at the individual level, but what we're trying to do is raise some of this stuff up to the system level. So in the UK, Tesco, the big supermarket over there, if you know the UK, they're the Woolworths of the UK, they are formally involved in these kinds of programs. So you can go into any Tesco and say, I'm looking for a 3-hour job for my person, and Tesco have already engaged in these initiatives. So this is where you get that big scale and the big shifts, if you can get the big companies to be involved, as well as your high street, you know, like we all do. Both my daughters got their first job because I went to Baker's Delight and there was a sign in the window or whatever. So using your own networks as well is the other way. So in the US, they have a fantastic database in the US, which we don't have, where they track people for a long time. It's a longitudinal database, and that's why they call it predicting. So students who do this, it predicts A predicts B. It's correlation. For those of you who remember maths, it's correlation. Paid employment is the biggest predictor of later work. So I think from my perspective, I don't think it matters if you work in Coles, Woolies, Macca's, whatever. It's getting in at 15 and getting in the door. That's what changes potentially changes the trajectory for you. I'm just conscious of time because I'm getting the wind up. So interagency collaboration, as I said, this is formal systems joining up. So TAFEs, schools, etc. So it's your local school having a connection to the local TAFE that's at a formal level. And what it does is it builds the capacity of all the individual parts of the system, the siloed bits, to work together. They start to solve problems at the system level. So they start working around individuals, but then eventually they go, oh, actually, we've got 25 Jennies. What we need to do is build something to cater to all the Jennies, not just that one over there. So that's where we start to see systems working better. As I said, if we didn't have complex systems, we wouldn't need system navigators. All right, so let's jump into some quick examples of good practice. So we've just evaluated the Down Syndrome Association's Employment Connections program. It's also an ILC grant, the grant that keeps on giving. So it's a national program. It focused on a number of aspects, so raising expectations about employment for people with Down syndrome, and they provided structured support to families and employers. It drew from the evidence, so particularly around customised employment, supported employment. They provided resources, family support, a work readiness program, and then they had ambassadors and then a national awareness campaign that they ran. So the Employment Connection Service, that's the bit that we evaluated. It was one-to-one support for people to find and maintain employment based on supported employment or customised employment approaches. Over 80 people have been employed to date in about a year and a half, I think it's been running. They've just got some more funding. All of the jobs are award wage. They're all in integrated workplaces. People drew from their NDIS funding if they needed ongoing support. The jobs have been really successful, very high retention rates. Some of the people moved from sheltered workshops out into open employment using the program. So this is the kind of approach where, you know, if we could get this across Australia, this very highly individualised one-to-one approach, you know, it provides kind of an avenue for those supports. That I'll find out if that's available, that evaluation. When we write evaluations, we give them to the organisation, but I'm pretty sure we can get that one for you. This is the Integrated Practical Placement Program. This was done in Victoria. You also have them here in Queensland. Uniting Care runs some of these. Sometimes they're called Project Search. So these are work-based programs. In Australia, we've built them on the Certificate 1 in Work Education and Transition course. I haven't got time to talk about that today, but I think that program hasn't been reviewed for 35 years and it's probably had its day. But the point is that people are on-site learning in situ. So they do a couple of hours of classroom learning, but it's very focused. Like if they're covering occupational health and safety, they'll do a little bit in the morning, then they'll go and do occupational health and safety in the workplace, and then they come back and do a reflection piece. It's unpaid. They do 3 rotations per student. This was in a hospital, this one. But they choose which work areas. So at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, they had cleaning, childcare, instruments, sterilisation, fundraising, admin, like they had a whole range of jobs. 80% of them were employed at the end, and some of them went on to do a Certificate 2 or Certificate 3 qualification in the particular area that they ended up working in. In the UK, these are massive. They are funding these for students as they're coming out of school. They've got big employers involved, but they've also got high street employers involved. So they recognise that some people live in sort of villages or smaller areas. So they might get 3 high street employers to, that's what they call them over there, 3 local businesses to group together and offer the traineeship, the internship, and they rotate around the 3. Very high success rates, mostly moving into other jobs though, not staying with the employer but moving into other jobs. Work integration, social integration, I think I covered this up enough before. They are starting to emerge in Australia. So Hotel Etico is one, if you've heard of it. They've got a hotel out in the Blue Mountains, training up people in hospitality, and then they've now got arrangements with some of the large hotel chains who then employ people into the jobs. So this is what I learned overseas very, very quickly. So supported employment, in the UK they've ring-fenced 100,000 places a year for people with autism and intellectual disability, and they're using relational commissioning. So that means it's not competitive tendering, it's we want you to deliver it, and we're going to build, the government are going to build a relationship with you to make sure you can deliver it properly, in a nutshell. The SEQF is the Supported Employment Quality Framework, so that means that's what they have to deliver against. They've got these fantastic academies in Northern Ireland. So they're 3-day rapid programs and they're employer driven. So Tesco needs workers. People come in, do this 3-day academy, guaranteed interview for everyone and guaranteed positions available. So the employer has to say there's 5 or 6 positions available, whatever. Again, very high success rate, meeting an employer need. Supported internships, that's what I talked about before. So better be careful what I say, not that I'm a big fan of Amazon, but Amazon are doing it in the UK, Tesco's, Apple, Coca-Cola, big companies are offering them, as well as the smaller ones, and they're run through the colleges over there, so the TAFEs run them, that's how they run. And of course, as you know, there's a TAFE nearly everywhere, around. There were some great employer-led initiatives that I saw in Vienna, so particularly around autism and IT, that seems to be the big one. So this is IT companies can't get enough workers, will work collaboratively with a partner organisation to bring the right talent pool into their businesses, basically. And then I saw a fantastic Beacon College operate in the US. So that's a college-based program. People live on campus. They do all the usual college things, including a semester abroad. And again, very big focus on customised employment at the end. All right, I think I better stop. I'm going to get in trouble. All right, there's the last slide. I think we need to change attitudes and language. I think language is really important. Building collaboration. The one I wanted to point to was the role of families, actually, in advocating. Yeah, I think it's really important that families pick up the advocacy piece collectively and individually. Advocate for your own person, but then collectivise as you are and advocate, because this government is listening. So, all right, sorry to rush at the end there.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And if we have any time left at the end, we'll open up